myself for this invitation. And I'll speak in English today because I think that there are many people who are not English speaking in the audience. लेकिन अगर कोई सवाल जवाब हिंदुस्तानी में हो तो मुझे कोई दुश्वारी नहीं है, मैं हिंदुस्तानी में भी बात कर सकता हूँ. Couple of things that I want to start before I continue with what I want to say. First of all, I think that you have here 2 books by a journalist, in fact 3 books by 2 journalists that make the task of a clean chit very difficult. And I'm talking about Gujarat 2002, the book published by Penguin, written by Shuddhabrata Sengupta, as well as 2 books by Manoj Mitta, When Tree Shook Delhi, and the fiction of fact-finding. And there is a certain reason why I think that these books and this kind of reporting and journalism is extremely important. Because as a friend pointed out from the audience, the history of massacres in India is not new. What is new is that there are a lot of people, journalists, people within civil society, ordinary human beings like you and me, who are willing to stick their neck out and take risks by simply stating certain facts. The history of extensive massacres of sections of the population which have occasionally been of a genocidal character, and I will try and talk about the word genocide with some importance later, goes, as you rightly pointed out, the friend who spoke from there, right back to 1947. And the history of cover-ups and clean chits also goes back to 1947. And it's not just Jammu in August, September 1947, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed by the armed forces of the Dogra state. And there was no punishment for that to the rulers of the Kashmir state, the Dogra ruling family. It goes right back to the massacres and atrocities of both sides that were committed in Manoj's hometown, Hyderabad, between 47 and 48. And had there been journalists of the caliber of Manoj Mitta and Shuddhabrata Rajan around in 1947-48 and in its immediate aftermath, we would have known that the Home Minister, then Home Minister of India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, presided over many of these massacres because he ordered the so-called police action that took place in Hyderabad, right, which involved units of the army as well as units of the Air Force. We also know that there is something called a Pandit Sundarlal Committee report, which finally saw the light of day in 2013. How many years between 1948 and 2013? Quite a few decades. There many of you are researching, possibly researchers of history and political science. The Sundarlal Committee report is now available at the Nehru Memorial Museum. Its conservative estimate of the casualties in Hyderabad that took place when the so-called police action disarmed Muslim villages and offered arms to Hindu villagers was between 27,000 to 40,000 dead. Gujarat 2002 was an undeniable massacre, but it is not a massacre that stands alone and uniquely of itself. In 1983, there was a massacre in Delhi, in Assam. More than 6,000 people were killed, men, women, and children. Unarmed people were killed. You might recall the fact that, who, for instance, who were the people, instigators or responsible people for the Delhi massacre? In Manoj Mitta's book, he rightly points out that irresponsible statements by political leaders have culpability. So if in 1984 you have Rajiv Gandhi saying that when a great tree falls, the earth shakes, that was the cover and the culpability that protected people like H.K.L. Bhagat, in his old age, dotage, went mad, not being able to live through the nightmares of 1984, to Jagdish Titler, to several other people in the Congress party who were clearly the organizers of those massacres. And just as Narendra Modi needs to be held accountable for his acts of commission and omission, so I believe do those who held the Home Ministry in the transition between the governments of Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, and also Rajiv Gandhi, for that statement. When a great tree falls, the earth shakes. What did Mr. Narendra Modi say on the 27th of February? It is alleged that in a closed-door meeting to police officers, he made the claim and the statement that Hindu mobs should be allowed to do their work so that the anger subsides. In the context of Bulwark society, we know he made a statement on the 1st of March on ZTV, which is detailed in Manoj's excellent book, where he said, there was a provocation, Ehsan Jafri fired rifle shots, the crowd were provoked. Neglecting to point out, I mean, even if we assume this complete hypothetical fiction that he got to know of the Bulwark Society massacre at 8:30, presumably at 8:30, the sequence of events of the day would have been very clear to him. You know, the mob gathered at 11, a police officer actually went in and fired in the air, the mob dispersed, the mob reassembled. All these things have been happening. Zakia Jafri, Ehsan Jafri are making phone calls. All these things are a matter of the record. But even despite that, just as he said this was an act of terrorism, Godra, he goes on to say, well, you know what happened in Bulwark society was that Ehsan Jafri fired some shots. So not only is he lying about what he knew, he's also telling us lies about what were the actual causes of specific incidents. What happened on the 27th of February? What happened on the 28th of February? And that is why forensic investigations are really important. What happened in Delhi? If you look carefully at the records of the Indian Parliament, they're all online. Every single sentence uttered through the years, the decades of the Indian Parliament's functioning is absolutely online. On the 28th of May in 1996, during the debate on the continuity or otherwise of the first Vajpayee government, the first BJP-led NDA government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the great moderate leader of the BJP, who everyone likes to contrast with Narendra Modi, you have as a matter of record, Indrajit Gupta, the then CPI leader, talking about the Delhi massacre. And I'd like to read to you what he says. They are on record. My friend Sri Vajpayee, who is a very, very old friend of mine, and I think we are on very good terms with each other. We have seen one face of him here in the debate. During this debate, all the media, the press and everybody have definitely been very impressed by his sobriety, his calmness, his appeal to everybody, his reasonableness, etc., etc. These are all the virtues that are now actually being built up for Sri Narendra Modi as well. He's sober, he's calm, he's reasonable, he doesn't, he's such a gentleman, just as Mr. Vajpayee was such a gentleman. But I regret to say that Sri Vajpayee on occasions also had a different face. This is the trouble. I would like to remind him that during the Assam elections of 1983, elections which could hardly be called elections because there was so much disturbance, voters could not come and cast their votes, the whole atmosphere was surcharged. There was so much fear of disturbances, riots and ethnic clashes and all that. Mr. Vajpayee was campaigning in Assam. I have got here a book which describes the fact that when he was addressing roadside election meetings in Assam, in that highly surcharged atmosphere, he said this, and I am quoting, and now he quotes Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Foreigners have come here, and the government does nothing. What if they had come into Punjab instead? People would have chopped them into pieces and thrown them away. That is what they did in Delhi. Right? We have this on record in the Parliament. There was an investigation done, fact-finding was done after the Delhi massacres. Was any responsibility pointed to those who instigated people to acts of violence? That man became the Prime Minister of this country. Like H.K. Bhagat, he suffered certain indignities in his old age. He continues to suffer them. Perhaps the same fate will await Mr. Narendra Modi. But justice will not be done by it. It's unfair to expect the infirmities of old age and the crisis of nightmares and a bad conscience to settle the accounts of genocide. The word genocide. The magistrate who delivered the statements at the conclusion of the SIT's presentation in Ahmedabad is a man called M.M. Ganatra. And he said that there is no reason for us to probe this further, and there are no problems. He lists several details which Manoj has dealt with very adequately, but I would point out one or two other things that he said. He said Zakia Jafri's complaint mentions the word genocide. And what is genocide? Genocide is the destruction of national and ethnic groups after a deliberate fashion. And since no national or ethnic groups were targeted in Gujarat, there was no genocide. Alright? And also he goes on to say, in any case, genocide is a word that is a combination of a Latin and a Greek word and has no bearing in our reality. Right? So two reasons. One, no national group was destroyed. Muslims are of course not a nationality, they are not an ethnicity. The destruction of Gujarati Muslims does not amount to genocide because they are not a nationality, not an ethnicity. Secondly, even if they were, the word genocide is not part of our reality. It comes from Latin and Greek. Actually, it doesn't. There is no word called genocide that you will find in any Latin or Greek dictionary. Alright? The word genocide was invented in 1945 by a man called Philip Lemkin, who is a pioneer in international jurisprudence, who was trying to intellectually deal with what Nazism had done in Europe. The wholesale destruction of Jewish people, who were, remember, neither a nationality nor an ethnicity. Jews are not an ethnic group, they were not by any means, and still are not, a nation. They were just a group of people, and it wasn't only Jews, it was Jews, the Roma, Roma people, it was who are also called gypsies, it was homosexuals, it was communists, it was anyone who differed with the then Nazi regime. In order to understand the entirely foreign and novel nature of this systematic destruction, Lemkin coined the word genocide. And initially, it was talked in terms of national and ethnic groups. But subsequently, Lemkin talks about the identification of any group of people and the attempt to systematically destroy them. Those attempts have been made several times in our history. Right? Gujarat being only one of them. It is true when people say that you should not single out Gujarat, it is not the unique and exceptional case. I wholeheartedly agree. It is not a singular and exceptional case. The violence of Gujarat in 2002 is a reminder of the way in which systematic violence against large groups of people is repeatedly mobilized by all forms of mainstream political power in this country. And they have been done so since 1948. If you want to hold Narendra Modi guilty and culpable for his actions, you will logically have to think also about the man whose statue he's building as well. The historical record does not absolve it. Alright? Let me end on a few other observations. Gujarat 2002 is not the only index of crimes. Even if there were no pogroms in 2002 in Gujarat, there would still be reason in international law for there to be prosecutions of people like Narendra Modi, as well as those under his authority who carried out actions. You remember, for instance, the death of a young woman called Ishrat Jahan and her companions. I'm sure you know about this, correct? And there is a CBI investigation that is continuing, that is still happening. Occasionally there are summons to certain interesting people. They remain confined, however, to the police officers. And some of the characters in the dramatis personae are the same. You know, what is his name? P.P. Pandey, who figures in the investigations of the SIT, or in proceedings of the, sorry, not investigation, we should not call them investigations. The proceedings of the SIT vis-a-vis the Gujarat 2002 events also figures in the Ishrat Jahan investigations. Right? Just as there are so many historical resonances with presence, the commission that sort of papered over 1984 was an anonymity commission. there also then was a second Nanavati Commission with the same Nanavati being pulled out of the woodwork to do his work. I mean, there are these many characters all over the world, all over our history and all over our current society, who do the bidding of what needs to be done to paper over cracks, regardless of who is in power, whether it is the BJP or it is the Congress. All right. Okay, let's go back to Ishrat Jahan. When the Ishrat Jahan worms started coming out of the woodwork, when the closets were open, skeletons started falling out of the cupboard, there were certain predictable lines of defense. The entire operation of the so-called Ishrat Jahan encounter, as we know well by now, was conducted by officers of the Intelligence Bureau. And some of these officers are currently in some cloud. And it has been said that they were officers of the State Intelligence Bureau, and obviously they were talking to their superior officers in the Central Intelligence Bureau. So the BJP's line of defense has been, well, you can't fix responsibility only on Narendra Modi's government, because after all, the Intelligence Bureau reports to its officers at the Central Intelligence Bureau. So the responsibility for Ishrat Jahan's assassination is equally distributed between governments that are led by the BJP and governments led by the Congress. That is actually a charge that I don't disagree with at all. Alright? Yes, Superior Intelligence Bureau officers at the center were handling inputs from Gujarat. There is a paper trail. Who was the person involved who was maintaining and consistently gathering and coordinating intelligence? There's something called the Multi-Agency Intelligence Input Division, the Intelligence Bureau. The senior-most officer, one of the senior-most officers in the Intelligence Bureau, reports directly to the Home Minister and to the Prime Minister with weekly status updates. The gentleman at the time was a man called Ajit Doval. Who is Ajit Doval? He's a high-ranking member of the Bharatiya Janata Party today. Alright? So here you have, what is her name? Nirmala Sitharaman, BJP spokesman on TV appearing. Gujarat government cannot be held responsible for Intelligence Bureau actions because Intelligence Bureau actions come from the center. Who is at the center? A man who is now with the BJP. Right? I think this is a wonderful partnership here. You can play this between the center and the state, and everybody can blame each other. Right? So, what is Ajit Doval? And he actually talked about it. Somebody had the foresight and the intelligence to interview the man. And he talks about this and he says, well, we don't know that Ishrat Jahan was a terrorist. But we also do not know that Ishrat Jahan was not a terrorist. These are his exact words. She was a non-terrorist. Alright? So anybody who is not a terrorist can be a terrorist, which actually includes all of us. Alright? Presuming that we are not terrorists. But just because we are not terrorists does not mean that we cannot be not terrorists. Now, this is the way in which governance is actually conducted in this country. Just yesterday, a very esteemed letter of many op-eds, a man called Ramchandra Guha, who also thinks he's a historian. He's written a good book on cricket. But he said that actually we have nothing to fear with Narendra Modi coming to power because the structures of democracy and republican governance in India are very stable. And they will outlast the damages that someone like Modi can wreak. They will not be affected by Narendra. That's true. What I think is actually really important for all of us to think about is that Narendra Modi's coming to power at the center is not really going to change things all that much. They have changed already. All this is a preparation. If you look at people who are joining the BJP, they include chiefs of army staff, former heads of the intelligence services, former heads of the law. What is happening is in fact a softening. One wing of the state has decided that it's better managed when this man comes into power. that the functions and the logic of processes that actually govern this country will be more efficient and more streamlined. They're already efficient and streamlined. That's why editors lose their jobs and have time to come and talk to you. That's why many other things happen in this country. So there is actually a pattern of the way in which power is deployed and concentrated in this country that makes the emergence of Narendra Modi necessary and also possible. Necessary and possible. We are actually on the threshold of witnessing that necessity and that possibility bear its fruit. We don't know yet. I don't believe in talking about what will happen after events in April, because I don't know yet. Who knows? Maybe, Jayalalitha could be prime minister. Who knows? High chances. But the logic of operations that is at work will then continue to find its way to do the things even if Jayalalitha is prime minister. Alright? So, you have to be prepared as young people who are not terrorists. Like Ishrat Jahan, who was just your age. You have to be prepared to be able to deal with these realities. They have unfolded in front of your eyes. Today the media talks, today people in all walks of life talk about Atal Bihari Vajpayee as if he was a doodh mein dhula hua farishta. Poet tha, kavi tha, bada acha. Nehri massacre was 6 times Gujarat. Alright? Most of you, I think, were not born. I was a teenager during then. My life changed in 1984. I was growing up. I shaved the brother of my then girlfriend and I cut his hair and that man went mad in 1984. I lost any trust, any faith I have in any of these institutions that Ramchandra Gohal thinks will outlast Narendra Modi. At the age of 14. I've never been able to give it back. But I believe that ordinary human beings like Manoj Gupta, Siddharth Varadarajan, all of you, who pay attention to details and not to the rhetoric of progress, development, these things. Just the detail, just the detail. Just pay attention to the details and we might still be able to survive whosoever comes, whether it's Nandan Nilekani or Jayalalitha or Narendra. Thank you. Welcome to the